Are the Toronto Maple Leafs so desperate that they're willing to mortgage their already depleted future for a 32-year-old injury-prone forward? The question hangs in the air like a bad omen over Scotiabank Arena, where the unthinkable has become reality. This isn't the Toronto we've grown accustomed to watching, the regular season juggernaut that cruises into April with home ice advantage locked up. No, this is a franchise in freefall, clinging to second-last place in the Eastern Conference like a life raft in stormy seas, and general manager Brad Treliving is reportedly reaching for lifelines that might just pull the entire ship under. The latest whisper from the hockey rumor mill? Columbus Blue Jackets captain Boone Jenner has caught Toronto's attention, and according to insider David Pagnotta, the Maple Leafs would love to land the gritty Ontario native. But here's where the plot thickens and where every rational Leafs supporter should feel their stomach drop. This potential acquisition reeks of panic rather than prudent planning. The uncharted waters Toronto never expected to navigate. Let's establish the gravity of this situation with crystal clarity. The Toronto Maple Leafs currently sit 30th in the Eastern Conference standings. Read that again. 30th. One measly point separating them from the Buffalo Sabres, a franchise that's made missing the playoffs an art form. This core, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, John Tavares, has known nothing but regular season dominance for years. Playoff disappointment? Sure, that's been their calling card. But missing the dance entirely? That was supposed to be impossible with this much talent concentrated on one roster. Yet here we stand in late November 2025, watching Brad Treliving work the phones not from a position of strength, but from a place of borderline desperation. The 2025-26 season has been nothing short of catastrophic for a team that entered training camp with legitimate Stanley Cup aspirations. Instead of discussing playoff matchups and home ice advantage, we're debating whether Toronto should be buyers or sellers, a conversation that would have seemed absurd just 3 months ago. The psychological weight of this collapse cannot be overstated. This isn't just about wins and losses, it's about the complete disintegration of an identity. The Maple Leafs have been many things over the past 7 years: chokers, underachievers, playoff disappointments, but they've never been bad. Not like this. Not staring up at 29 other teams in their conference, wondering if the season is already lost before American Thanksgiving. Enter Boone Jenner, the complicated solution. So, who exactly is Boone Jenner, and why does he represent both a potential solution and a massive red flag for Toronto's front office? On paper, the 32-year-old Blue Jackets captain checks several boxes that Treliving desperately needs to fill. He's a 200-foot center who plays with the kind of snarl and physicality that Toronto has historically lacked when the games matter most. He can contribute offensively, though we'll dissect those numbers shortly, and he brings legitimate leadership credentials as Columbus's captain. Most importantly for the narrative Treliving wants to sell, Jenner is from Dorchester, Ontario, giving this potential acquisition that hometown boy comes home storyline that Toronto media would devour. David Pagnotta laid out the appeal succinctly. I'm sure there are players that they'd love to target, like a Boone Jenner, for example. In Columbus, their captain, who has that jam, who can put the puck in the net, can play top 6 minutes. Sounds perfect, right? A gritty, productive, experienced center who can slot into the top 6 and provide that elusive playoff identity everyone keeps talking about. But here's where reality crashes through the fantasy like a freight train. Jenner is currently injured, because of course he is. The injury bug has been Jenner's constant companion in recent years, limiting him to more than 60 games, just once since the 2020-21 season. Let that sink in. In 4 of the past 5 seasons, this player Toronto is reportedly targeting has been unable to stay healthy enough to play even 75% of a full campaign. For a team already dealing with injury concerns and desperately needing reliable contributors down the stretch, targeting a player with this medical history borders on reckless. It's like watching someone with a leaky roof decide the best solution is to buy a house with foundation problems because it has nice curtains. The asset problem, trading from an empty cupboard, even if we suspend disbelief and assume Jenner stays healthy, a generous assumption given his track record, Toronto faces an even more fundamental problem. they have virtually nothing to trade. Pagnotta didn't mince words about Toronto's predicament. Toronto doesn't have a significant amount of assets in the cupboard either. So it's a very tricky situation for them to be in. This is the consequence of years of all-in mentality, of trading future assets for present-day improvements that never quite materialized into playoff success. The Maple Leafs prospect pool ranks among the weakest in the NHL. Their draft pick inventory has been ransacked by previous deadline deals. And their cap situation? Don't even get started on the cap situation. Jenner carries a $3.75 million cap hit in the final year of his 4-year, $15 million contract, making him a pending unrestricted free agent this summer. That's actually manageable from a cap perspective, but it creates a different problem. Columbus knows they're dealing with a desperate buyer who needs immediate help, and they know Toronto has limited ammunition. It's the worst possible negotiating position. Don Waddell, Columbus's shrewd general manager, will smell blood in the water. He'll demand a premium, knowing Treliving can't afford to walk away empty-handed with his team drowning in the standings. The asking price will be inflated, and Toronto, backed into a corner, might just pay it. Pagnotta alluded to this dynamic. Is this a position where, okay, well listen, but you're going to have to overpay a little bit? A little bit might be the understatement of the season. The Scott Lawton parallel, a cautionary tale for those with short memories. Let me refresh your recollection about what happens when desperate teams overpay for gritty veterans at the deadline. The Philadelphia Flyers recently dealt Scott Lawton, a player with a remarkably similar profile to Jenner, for a package that included a first-round pick and additional assets. Lawton, like Jenner, was a two-way center with leadership qualities, playoff experience, and that intangible truculence that general managers convince themselves is worth its weight in gold. The result? The acquiring team got a solid but unspectacular contributor who didn't move the needle significantly, while Philadelphia walked away with valuable assets they could use to continue their rebuild. The numbers bear out the comparison. Jenner's production over the past 3 seasons, when adjusted for games played, mirrors Lawton's almost exactly. Both players hover around the 40 to 50 point pace over a full season, both bring physicality, both kill penalties, both provide veteran presence. If Toronto gives up a first-round pick, which they can ill afford, plus additional pieces for Jenner, they're essentially repeating the same mistake that's haunted other deadline buyers. They're paying championship prices for middle six production, all because they've convinced themselves that grit and character are the missing ingredients, rather than addressing the fundamental defensive breakdowns and goaltending inconsistencies that have actually plagued this team. The injury elephant in the room, let's return to the most glaring issue with this potential acquisition. Boone Jenner cannot stay healthy. Since 2020 to 21, here's his games played ledger: 2020 to 21, 51 games in a shortened season; 2021 to 22, 59 games; 2022 to 23, 64 games, his only healthy season; 2023 to 24, 57 games; 2024 to 25. Currently injured, this isn't a player who occasionally misses time with minor ailments. This is a player whose body is breaking down, who's entering his mid-30s, and who plays a physically demanding style that only accelerates the wear and tear. For a Toronto team that desperately needs reliability, that needs players who will be available for the grueling playoff push, assuming they even make it that far. Acquiring Jenner feels like buying a used car with 200,000 miles because you like the color. Sure, it might run fine for a few weeks, but you're one pothole away from catastrophic engine failure. And remember, Jenner is hurt right now. Toronto would potentially be trading valuable assets for a player they can't even dress immediately, hoping he recovers in time to make an impact, hoping he stays healthy once he returns, hoping his 32-year-old body can withstand the physical demands of a playoff race. That's a lot of hoping for a team that's already hoping they can climb out of the basement. What Toronto actually needs, hint, it's not this. Here's the uncomfortable truth that Brad Treliving needs to confront. Boone Jenner doesn't solve any of Toronto's actual problems. The Maple Leafs aren't sitting 30th in the Eastern Conference because they lack gritty bottom six forwards. They're there because their defensive structure has collapsed, their goaltending has been inconsistent, and their star players haven't performed to their capabilities. Adding a 32-year-old injury-prone center who might contribute 35 to 40 points over a full season, if he stays healthy, doesn't address the systematic failures that have defined this catastrophic start. It's a band-aid on a bullet wound, a cosmetic fix that allows management to tell fans they did something without actually addressing the core issues. What Toronto needs is a complete reset of their defensive approach, potential goaltending upgrades, and honest conversations about whether this core group has simply reached its ceiling. They need structural changes, not peripheral additions. They need to fix the foundation, not redecorate the living room. But structural changes are hard. They require admitting mistakes, potentially moving beloved players, and accepting that the window might be closing faster than anyone wants to acknowledge. Trading for Boone Jenner is easy. It's the path of least resistance, the move that generates headlines and gives the appearance of action without requiring the difficult decisions that actually need to be made. Even if we ignore the injury concerns, the asset depletion, and the questionable fit, Toronto still has to navigate one of the tightest cap situations in the NHL. The Maple Leafs are currently operating with minimal cap space, having committed massive portions of their budget to their core forwards. Every dollar matters. Every transaction requires corresponding moves to maintain compliance. Acquiring Jenner's $3.75 million cap hit, even with Columbus retaining salary, means Toronto needs to clear space elsewhere. Who gets moved out? What roster player becomes expendable to make room for this acquisition? And does that secondary move weaken the team in other areas, creating a zero-sum game where Toronto isn't actually improving, just shuffling deck chairs? These are the questions Treliving must answer before pulling any trigger, and the math gets complicated quickly. The Maple Leafs don't have the luxury of simply adding pieces. Every addition requires a subtraction, and those subtractions have consequences. The pending UFA factor, rental or long-term investment. Boone Jenner becomes an unrestricted free agent on July 1st, 2026, just 7 months from now. This creates another layer of complexity to any potential deal. Is Toronto acquiring Jenner as a pure rental, accepting that he'll walk in free agency after hopefully helping them on a playoff run? If so, the price should reflect that temporary nature. Rentals traditionally cost less than players with term remaining, precisely because the acquiring team gets such limited use. Or does Treliving envision signing Jenner to an extension, keeping him in Toronto beyond this season? That would justify a higher acquisition cost, but introduces new risks. What kind of contract does a 32-year-old injury-prone center command on the open market? What term and salary would Jenner demand? And is Toronto prepared to commit long-term money to a player whose best years are clearly behind him? Neither option is particularly appealing. As a rental, Jenner represents an expensive gamble on a team that might not even make the playoffs. As a long-term investment, he represents the kind of aging veteran contract that handcuffs franchises for years. Columbus, meanwhile, faces their own decision. Do they trade their captain mid-season while the team struggles, accepting whatever return they can get? Or do they hold on to Jenner, make a push for respectability, and risk losing him for nothing in free agency? The leverage in these negotiations is murky at best, which typically means both sides end up dissatisfied with whatever deal eventually materializes. The psychological dimension, desperation versus strategy, perhaps the most concerning aspect of Toronto's reported interest in Jenner isn't the player himself, but what it reveals about the organization's mindset. This feels like desperation masquerading as strategy. It feels like a front office that's panicking, that's abandoned whatever long-term plan they might have had in favor of throwing darts at a board and hoping something sticks. It feels like the hockey equivalent of a student who didn't study all semester cramming the night before the final exam. Great organizations make calculated moves from positions of strength. They identify specific needs, target players who fill those needs, and execute transactions that improve the team without mortgaging the future. They maintain discipline even when things aren't going well, trusting their processes and refusing to make panic moves that feel good in the moment but prove disastrous long-term. Toronto, right now, doesn't feel like a great organization. They feel reactive, scattered, and increasingly desperate. The Boone Jenner interest epitomizes this mindset. It's a move that would generate positive headlines for 48 hours, allow management to claim they're addressing the team's needs, and ultimately accomplish very little while costing assets Toronto can't afford to lose. What Columbus wants and why Toronto can't afford it. Let's put ourselves in Don Waddell's shoes for a moment. You're the general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets, a team that's also struggling but firmly committed to a rebuild. Your captain, a respected veteran and local hero, is in the final year of his contract and will likely walk in free agency. What do you want in return? At minimum, you want a first-round pick. Probably a mid-level prospect. Maybe a roster player who fits your timeline better. And given that you're dealing with a desperate buyer in Toronto, you're going to ask for even more, knowing they might just pay it. This is where Toronto's lack of assets becomes crippling. They don't have expendable first-round picks lying around. Their prospect pool is barren. Their roster players are either core pieces they can't move or depth pieces that don't move the needle for Columbus. So what's the deal? Does Toronto give up their 2026 first-rounder, essentially betting their entire future on a playoff push that seems increasingly unlikely? Do they package multiple lesser assets, further depleting an already thin organizational depth? Do they include a young roster player like Matthew Knies or Fraser Minton, sacrificing future potential for present-day help? None of these options are appealing, and all of them represent the kind of win-now desperation that typically backfires spectacularly. The alternative path, patience and perspective. Here's a radical suggestion for Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Don't make this trade. I know, it's not sexy. It doesn't generate headlines. It doesn't give fans the dopamine hit of a deadline day acquisition. But sometimes the best move is no move at all. Toronto's problems run deeper than personnel. They need time to figure out their defensive structure, to get healthy, to allow their coaching staff to implement systems that actually work. They need their star players to rediscover the form that made them stars in the first place. Trading valuable assets for Boone Jenner or any similar gritty veteran doesn't accelerate that process. It just creates the illusion of progress while actually making the long-term situation worse. If Toronto is serious about competing for championships, they need to take a hard look in the mirror and ask whether this core group, as currently constructed, can actually win. If the answer is yes, then they need to trust the process, stay patient, and avoid panic moves. If the answer is no, then they need to make bigger, more fundamental changes, not acquire 32-year-old rentals who won't move the needle. The verdict: a risky gamble Toronto can't afford. So, where does this leave us? Is Boone Jenner a fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs? The answer, unfortunately for Brad Treliving, is a resounding no, or at least not at the price Columbus will demand. Jenner is a fine player. He's a respected veteran, a capable two-way center, and someone who could contribute to a contending team. But he's not the solution to Toronto's problems. He's not worth the assets Columbus will demand, and his injury history makes him a massive risk for a team that desperately needs reliability. This potential acquisition represents everything wrong with deadline day thinking. The belief that adding character and grit can paper over fundamental structural problems, the willingness to overpay for marginal improvements, and the desperation that leads teams to make moves they'll regret within months. Toronto needs to resist the temptation. They need to take a breath, assess their situation honestly, and make decisions based on logic rather than panic. Boone Jenner might be a nice player, but he's not the answer to the question Toronto is asking. And if Brad Treliving can't see that if he pulls the trigger on this deal and mortgages more of Toronto's future for a 32-year-old injury-prone rental, then the Maple Leafs' problems run even deeper than their 30th place standing suggests. The Toronto Maple Leafs stand at a crossroads. They can continue down the path of desperation, making panic moves that feel good in the moment but accomplish little long-term. Or They can take a step back, assess their situation honestly, and make the difficult decisions that actually need to be made. Boone Jenner represents the former path, the easy choice, the move that generates headlines without solving problems. Toronto deserves better. Their fans deserve better. And frankly, their future deserves better than being traded away for a player who won't change their trajectory. The question isn't whether Toronto would love to land Boone Jenner. The question is whether they're smart enough to realize they shouldn't. What do you think about Toronto's reported interest in Boone Jenner? Is this the kind of move that could spark a turnaround, or is it just another example of deadline day desperation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like button if you want to see more hard-hitting analysis that cuts through the hype and tells you what's really happening in the NHL. This is the kind of honest conversation Toronto fans need to hear, even if it's not what they want to hear. Let's keep this discussion going. Your voice matters.